On a fateful day within the walls of the royal palace, a new heir was born, and the king looked at the infant with mixed admiration and anxiety. The child's hair and eyes were black as night. It was the mark of an ancient curse long hanging over these lands, a sign of a fate just beginning to unfold. Years later, under the cold glow of the full moon, the same fate began to converge. The boy, hidden in shadow from birth, remained a mystery to the world, while the grand stage prepared for a dramatic entrance that would change everything. In the midst of a lavish royal ball, Prince Lerberg Louvel shattered the festive atmosphere with a cold public statement. He stepped before the gathered nobles and announced that his engagement to Charlotte Merson was officially broken from this moment. She froze, the glass in her hand trembling as the weight of his words overwhelmed her. The sudden rejection took her breath away, her mind frantically searching for what could have caused such public humiliation. He turned away from her, asking in a voice without a trace of warmth whether she even understood the reason for his decision. Nearby, the young commoner Lucille watched with an expression that could have been feigned or genuine pain, becoming a quiet trigger for the prince's anger. The prince's accusations grew increasingly specific and venomous. He claimed to have discovered the full depth of her cruelty towards Lucille. He ignored her confused denials, recounting an incident where she allegedly pushed the girl down the stairs, dismissing her pleas of innocence as acting. Without hesitation, he gave a sign to his guards, Filger and Dord, to move. A sharp command and the activation of a magical binding ring the trap worked, leaving no chance to escape or argue. Suddenly, heavy iron chains materialized around her and snapped shut with a cruel clatter. A thick metal collar, like those worn by the most dangerous criminals, clamped around her neck, pressed down on her hands, and in a moment sealed her fate. She struggled under the weight of the iron, screaming that a terrible mistake had been made, but her words met deaf indifference. The prince stood unshaken and declared that her wickedness had been exposed, and no protest would change the truth he was convinced he had seen. He looked down on his former fiancée with icy superiority and called it a final mercy. He promised her a chance to apologize to Lucille, treating the noblewoman bound in chains as an ordinary criminal finally brought to justice. He froze in outrage as loud mocking laughter echoed through the grand hall. Its source was a young man with hair black as pitch, whose mad laughter cut through the heavy tension of the arrest. At first, this newcomer, Alfred Berglevel, the third prince, seemed to apologize for his rudeness, but admitted that everything had happened exactly as he had predicted, clearly enjoying that Charlotte had so easily fallen into the trap. He confidently strides through the ballroom, and the gathered nobility whisper quietly and fearfully. They speak of the cursed child with black, pitch-like hair and eyes, and their superstitions flare up at the very appearance of the dark-haired prince. Ignoring the whispering, he turns his attention to the girl at the center of the scandal, points directly at her with his finger, and sharply asks if she is really Lucille, catching the commoner off guard. A predatory gleam lit up in his eyes. He leaned closer and his face twisted into something eerie, saying aloud that an ordinary commoner who does not know her place has always annoyed him, and there was a dangerous playfulness in his voice. The crowd instantly began to speak differently. People started to wonder whether the same cursed prince really cruelly mocked Lucille, or if he was framing Charlotte for his own purposes. His gaze remained sharp and calculated, and Charlotte could only watch, frozen in stunned silence, her thoughts probably racing to comprehend this sudden and chaotic intervention. Enraged by the mockery, the elder prince stepped forward, defended Lucille, and resolutely declared that he would never forgive his brother for the harm caused. Alfred, however, only responded with a sneer, saying such behavior was unworthy of his title. With a cold, confident smile, he challenges everyone in the room, pointing out the main weakness of their accusations: they have absolutely no proof that he committed any crime. When his brother insists that this very phrase is an admission of guilt, he simply laughed and waved his hand, explaining that he was merely enjoying how the drama unfolded and admitted nothing, leaving everyone present confused and irritated. He stood in the middle of the great hall, a barely noticeable smile playing on his lips as he weighed the accusations. Although the reputation of a schemer was deserved, this time no tricks were needed. He insisted that the reason was simple: there was no evidence because there never was anything of the sort. He adjusted his collar, and his dark eyes shone with cold, calculated confidence that left the critics empty-handed. Looking over the assembly, he felt the weight of the day. His brother was beginning his third year in senior school. It was a solemn event, and any change in family status should have been reported to him, but he received not a word. It became clear that Luer acted on his own whim, taking advantage of their father's absence to frame the Duchess over a simple school quarrel. And for him, this whole spectacle was complete nonsense. Absurd? In this chaos, the young Duchess finally found her voice, her gaze unwavering as she addressed the first prince. She pointed out the lack of common sense in his judgments and said she would step aside gracefully if his heart truly belonged to another, but her tone remained resolute. She saluted and immediately took the opportunity, reminding the assembly that their engagement was not just a private matter, but a formal agreement between the royal family and the House of Mercent. And without mutual consent, she insisted, his personal feelings were insufficient to break a bond of such political weight. Her arguments were drowned out by a sharp order to be silent when the first prince exploded with anger and shouted that his connection with Lucille was true love, a force that, in his words, would sweep away all stale traditions in its path. And Alfred, who was watching from the side, realized that things were heading into much more serious trouble. Royal authority hung in the air like a heavy burden, leaving Charlotte lonely and defenseless. While the king was absent, the Lure had absolute power because of this. Even the influential Mercen family fell silent, and the Duchess was left alone with her accuser. Alone, seeing no other way, the third prince accepted the role the court had already assigned him. He directly challenged his brother, asking if he really intended to hold him guilty without any evidence, and in his heart decided that the only way to resolve the deadlock was to take all the blame upon himself. This audacity only inflamed the first prince's anger. His eyes narrowed to thin slits, cold and poisonous. He called his brother a scoundrel and threatened to use force to teach him the lesson he thought he deserved. Chaos erupted in the ballroom when the first prince barked to his guards, "Seize the brother." The soldiers rushed forward, their heavy boots thundering on the shiny floor, and the guests scattered in panic, their screams echoing off the high vaults. However, he was too agile, leaping with supernatural grace and grabbing the edge of the huge crystal chandelier. The metal groaned under his weight as he swung high above the outstretched hands of the guards. His eyes narrowed, filled with determination. Stunned by this display of agility, the guards staggered and looked to their prince for further orders. A string of curses escaped his lips as he realized his brother was mocking his authority and demanding the men use magic and spears to bring down the fugitive. Panic among the nobility intensified. Many feared that any harm to the honored guests would bring a severe scandal to the royal family, and the guards barely held the perimeter, their attention torn between the fleeing crowd and the elusive figure hanging from the ceiling. Seeing that the situation was getting out of control, the first prince ordered increased security on the balcony. He was determined not to let the one they were chasing slip away. And nearby, a girl from the common folk silently watched, the heaviness of inevitable trouble written on her face as the guards fussed, carrying out the order. From his precarious perch, the prince with tousled hair watched the young duchess head to safety, and a slight smile of relief touched his lips. The main thing, ensuring her escape, he had already done. Now he just had to get out himself. He began to gather energy. A vortex of power swirled around him as he prepared his final distracting trick. The air hummed with the force of his magic, heralding a brutal end to the clash as he prepared to leap from the chandelier. A thunderous explosion tore through the ballroom, shattered the silence, and covered the floor with crystal shards as the chandelier was ripped from its mountings. And in the blinding flash and clouds of smoke, the prince vanished from the center of the hall, leaving behind only destruction. When the smoke cleared, the first prince stood frozen before the ruins, unable to believe his eyes and cursing that little rascal who had so skillfully outwitted him. High on the balcony railing, his brother glanced back once more and with a mocking smile noticed that the elder prince had completely lost his composure. With a final mocking farewell, he activated the glowing artifact on his wrist and was about to disappear into the night. The light intensified, cast long shadows across the balcony, and he made his last exit from the stage of his triumph, leaving his brother to deal with the ruins of the party. He slipped away, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a brother consumed by cold, smoldering rage. Standing amid the ruins of the ballroom, the first prince mockingly and politely bid farewell to the empty air, his face twisted with hatred and distrust. The rebellious prince disappeared further into the night sky. The guards frantically searched for orders, their eyes fixed on the retreating figure. The first prince sharply commanded to open fire, desperately trying to bring down his brother before he vanished completely. Brushing off the idea of immediate pursuit as a relic of feudal times, the prince decisively ordered his men to prioritize the safety of the guests and restore order. And although anxiety was evident on his companion's face, he remained steadfast, insisting that he definitely knew where his brother was headed. Despite the appearance of an indifferent commander, his calm cracked. He whispered his brother's name through clenched teeth, and the strength of his grip and the darkness in his gaze indicated that this struggle was far from over. Although the palace was in a state of heightened alert, the silence of the outer walls sharply contrasted with the chaos inside. The enormous stone structure towered under the moonlight, completely unaware of the fugitive hiding in its shadows. Standing on the cold stone battlements, the fugitive caught his breath, confident that he had finally shaken off his pursuers. He looked back at the fortress, a faint smile playing on his lips as he realized the guards had lost his trail. But his solitude did not last long. A familiar rhythmic clapping and a voice with mocking delight sounded in the air. The maid appeared, jokingly praising him as a villainous genius, which only irritated him. She jokingly defended her absence, insisting that her role in ensuring his escape route was far more important than merely watching the spectacle. He remained skeptical and accused her of simply looking for an excuse to avoid duties while he bore the brunt of the danger. Ranger, turning his thoughts to the most important matter, he asked about the Duchess's condition, and the maid reassured him. A guard had been assigned to her, and the lack of news meant that she was currently safe. She whispered a mysterious praise that momentarily confused him, but it seemed the immediate threat had passed, and they stood together on the wall, their next move hanging heavily in the cool night air. He stands, enduring Makina's teasing jabs, who squeals with delight at his heroic rescue of Charlotte and calls him a knight in shining armor. The maid's admiring praises clearly annoy him, and his face frowns as she leans in with a sly smile. Because of her relentless teasing, he is forced to defend his past, brushing off her hints that his feelings for Charlotte date back to her engagement to Lure. He insists those days are long gone, but his embarrassed expression hints at a storm beneath his cold mask as she presses him, asking what he will do next. He suggests she take care of Charlotte herself, but the maid just laughs, waves it off, and says she will go to her room to finally get some sleep. And with a final mocking farewell, she rushes away, leaving him alone in the night silence. Night now alone, the prince freezes by the cold stone wall. His gaze lingers on a small, unyielding green twig clinging to the wall. The silence of the palace courtyard seems to amplify his inner reflections as he looks at this tiny sign of life. Shaking off the momentary distraction, he turns away and mutters that his thoughts don't matter. He steps into the shadows, and the burden of the role of the evil prince which he imposed on himself weighs heavily on his shoulders. As the first rays of dawn touch the palisades, the morning air fills with the gentle chirping of birds. The majestic buildings stand in silence, sharply contrasting with the chaos of the previous night. In his room, he sprawled on the plush sofa. The fatigue from the night's escapades finally made itself known, and he rubs his head, thinking that the mess and noise he caused at the school party were probably an inevitable consequence of his plan. His solitude is interrupted by the appearance of a large, fluffy dove nearby. He immediately recognizes it, and like a tired father, addresses the bird, knowing the king uses his magical familiar to send messages from afar. Far away, through the bird, the king began asking about his motives, and he explained. It was a calculated risk so Charlotte wouldn't be set up. He says that by playing the role of the evil prince, he diverted suspicion from her, even if it further damaged his reputation. The messenger bird stands still. The king's voice acknowledges that saving Charlotte was a true feat, but the tone suddenly changes as if warning of impending trouble, and the prince is caught off guard, his eyes widening in anticipation of what will happen next. He flinches as the white dove persistently pecks at his head. The sharp beak constantly irritates, but he defends his decision to become the evil prince, saying the cursed child's fame is already irreparably ruined, so a few more bad rumors won't change much in his grand plan. The bird suddenly stops the attack, and at that very moment the royal voice cuts through the air with a stunning announcement. A marriage has been arranged for his son. The young prince widely opened his eyes in sincere disbelief. His mind went blank for a moment. The weight of this news hung over him. Stunned, he does not believe and asks if this is some cruel joke. Who would even ask for the hand of someone branded cursed? The king's voice remains firm. He dismisses his son's doubts and insists that this matter is very serious, regardless of how the prince sees his reputation. The father explains that a recent incident proved he needs closer supervision, and this marriage is a way for the royal power to tame his chaotic life. The prince finds this incredibly cruel and feels his freedom being taken away under the guise of management and discipline. He snorts contemptuously and demands to know who would even agree to such an arrangement with a person of his status. The king says that he himself initiated this contact and that the other party gave voluntary consent, which puts the prince in even greater confused surprise. Who is this mysterious person? Partner? While he tries to comprehend the king's words, the door opens and Makina announces the arrival of the mysterious bridegroom. The prince turns his gaze to the entrance. His heart pounding, the reality of the situation begins to reveal itself in full. In the corridor, Makina sighs with a knowing sigh as if she had always been aware of the secret. She invites the guest inside, stepping with exquisite, gentle steps across the threshold, announcing the arrival of the woman who agreed to this unexpected. Charlotte Merson enters the room. Her figure radiates grace and calm despite recent shocks. Politely apologizing, she steps inside in elegant attire, and with such composure that she looks exactly like the noblewoman she is. Her appearance leaves the prince completely speechless. His jaw drops as he realizes that the woman before him is precisely Charlotte, whom he had just cunningly saved from disgrace. Seeing how strongly his son reacted, the king teased him through the pigeon for falling so quickly for her, and enraged and embarrassed by this manipulation, the prince rushed forward, grabbed the bird, and demanded to know the true purpose of his father's sudden ring. He stands before the royal messenger bird and listens as the father coldly lays out a calculated deceit. To replace one lie with another, instead of showing Charlotte as a hooligan, rewrite everything so that she looks like a victim, framed by the third prince himself. Alone, the prince is silent. His expression darkens as the king admits that although the breaking off of the first prince's engagement is an undeniable fact, the circumstances of this need to be The king does not calm down, insisting that the royal family must take responsibility for the consequences of this scandal. Charlotte stands nearby, her gaze on the floor. She hears that she is still considered a valuable addition to the royal line, despite her fragile social Standing, irritated by the absurdity of the situation, the young man grabbed his hair and demanded to know why he had to be the one to marry her. and the king calmly replied that there were 4 important reasons for this. This is an agreement, the reasons are simply stated. He is one of the few suitable ones from the royal family. The marriage will fulfill Charlotte's wish, and most importantly, she is expected to restrain his unstable behavior. Check, he presses, demanding the last reason, but the king hesitates and says that it is just a rumor spreading around the pea. In the halls, before the king could explain, the door suddenly opened and Makena flew inside, her face glowing with the very gossip the king was talking about. 2. She explains that the academy is buzzing with new gossip. The third prince loved Charlotte from the first moment and orchestrated this whole conflict just to take her away from his older brother. The maid with a mischievous smile points directly at him and exclaims that in people's eyes he is just a man stealing his brother's girl, and he and Charlotte were left speechless by such audacity. Alfred is stunned by this absurdity and cannot understand where the rumor came from that he is stealing someone's girl. While he tries to recover from the confusion, Makena and Charlotte see his obvious suffering and wonder how everything could have gotten so out of control. He looks at the palace's lavish halls and feels part of this mess was created by himself by his actions or their absence. After that decisive event, he withdrew from public life, and in his absence others shaped how he was seen. He admits that his negligence helped the rumors spread. He deliberately locked himself in a room to avoid running into Lure's brother at school, and that self-isolation, which was supposed to be a shield, inadvertently became a breeding ground for lies. When he asks if Lure was really the one who organized this lie, Makena laughs cheerfully and confirms it. The realization strikes him. He is momentarily speechless, stunned by the depth of his brother's manipulations. She lively imitates Lure, dramatically telling how he kept telling everyone that Alfred treated Lucille badly, only because he was secretly obsessed with Charlotte. Her performance clearly shows how calculated this smear campaign was. The king, with a silent familiar dove beside him, confirms that this is the real situation, and silently watches as Alfred's irritation grows, and the weight of people's gazes turns into an undeniable force. His father proposes a stunning plan, not to fight the rumors, but to use them to his advantage to make Alfred and Charlotte's engagement real. And Alfred remains stunned, not understanding why they are even seriously considering such absurd logic. Mackinac points to the political benefit if they implement this plan. Charlotte will be presented as a victim of the treacherous third prince, and the public will change their attitude. Instead of the culprit, she will become a helpless girl deserving of sympathy. Clenching his fist in anger, he looked indignantly at his father and the maid, who so recklessly decided Charlotte's fate for show, and insisted. She has finally been acquitted, and this plan will only push her into a new trap of misfortunes. With fierce protective determination, he shouts that becoming the bride of a cursed child is a burden for life, and Charlotte looks, stunned that his care for her weighs more than her own reputation. He recoiled in disbelief. The realization of royal manipulation hit him like a physical blow, and he shouted that he was only playing the villain's assigned role and never thought it would be used as a pretext for forced engagement. But the king was unmoved and simply ordered preparations to appear in public, while Mackinac silently watched this tense scene. Gritting his teeth over this injustice, he pondered the fundamental laws of their world. Usually, magic is a predictable force governed by ancient rules that determine the potential of every living soul. Recalling his training, he remembered that most are born with a natural affinity for one of the 4 main elements: fire, water, earth, or wind. These forces are the foundation of all magic, depicted in ancient texts as sacred geometric patterns. Commoners are confined to these 4 limits. Their power grows or fades only from innate qualities, while kings stand apart. Their power transcends all usual boundaries. There is a 5th element, a shining golden force called ether. It is a divine sign that distinguishes royal blood among all others, a symbol of their right to rule and connection to the heavens. But when he looked within himself, he realized that golden light was not there. Instead, something much scarier was hidden inside him, the 6th element, a dark void where the royal light should shine. He understood. He has the same dark magic once possessed by the legendary one, a power so terrible that it once engulfed the entire world in an age of absolute darkness and despair. It possessed a power that from ancient times was a sign of destruction and catastrophe, and its shadow now clung to his soul, marking him as the harbinger of doom. Through this dark legacy, he was forced to live in solitude from a young age. Wherever he went, people whispered and stepped back, afraid of that ominous cloud that seemed to hang over him, so he found solace only in books. He suffered in this lonely, rejected life, only one he had ever known. A series of rejections pursued him up to this very moment when he stood before the king, who now wanted to use him. He clenches his fist so tightly that the glove's leather creaks from the tension. He decided to play the villain's role because he believed, if the king covered for him, the royal reputation would be dragged through the mud. In the mire of his patience, it snapped. He lashes out at his father, calling him a fool and a bad father, and the king, speaking through his bird assistant, remains indifferent and coldly says he never asked his son to take on such a burden. The monarch continued to brush it off, mockingly asking if that pitiful outburst was really all his foolish son could offer. Shifting attention, the king addresses the young duchess directly and asks if she is truly comfortable in this situation. Behind her, a maid watches the conversation, filled with anxiety and wonder. She stands proudly, her gaze calm, and explains that her position is unique among ducal houses. It is her own sincere desire. She clarifies that she wants to maintain ties with the royal family under any circumstances. Behind this devotion lies a rare and extraordinarily powerful gift, has an incredible amount of mana called silver mana, and it is whispered that this power is the closest to the royal ether itself. Thanks to this incredible mastery, she can confidently be considered the best person in the kingdom to support the royal lineage without a drop of royal blood in her veins. The king says the crown simply cannot afford to lose a person of such caliber. Seizing the moment, the prince directly asks her if, after his speech, she has any doubts about Menupon, which the maid sharply reproaches him for lack of technique. Attacked, she hesitates, clutching her dress with her hand and admits, under different circumstances with another man, she would probably have deeply hesitated. But a gentle, sincere smile appears on her lips as she looks at him, and without any doubt she says, since it is Heimverithing suits her. That's all, she was the one who approached him at that faithful party, like a ray of grace amidst the crowd. Even then her eyes followed him with deep anxiety because of the curse he bore, and with kindness that he exped. This realization struck him with sudden clarity. She truly, sincerely trusted him despite everything. That's all. Gritting his teeth, he cursed himself for his own blindness, his fist clenched under the weight of his failure while his devoted maid called. He named his own name. When she warned him that running away now would only bring shame to the young duchess, he yielded and openly admitted that this mess was entirely his fault. Turning back with a sharp, piercing gaze, he declared his agreement to the engagement with cold determination, and made it clear that his true nature would remain unchanged. He had changed. Walking further with new resolve, two women watched his distant back, the air seeming to grow heavier with the burden of his son. Determination. Reaching the door, he once again convinced himself that he would continue on the chosen path, just as he always remained behind in the quiet corridor. The young lady worried that her presence might be a burden, but her companion immediately waved it off and laughed. Concerns. With a confident smile, the maid boasted that her many years of service had given her a special understanding of the prince's truth. A sincere heart, a gaze filled with genuine determination meets her as the duchess makes a modest request. Charlotte asks if she would agree to tell more about the prince, sincerely wishing to truly understand the man she now butch. Hearing her request, the maid curved her lips into a knowing smile, then burst out with enthusiastic confidence. She praised the duchess for the wise choice to turn to her, declared that she had all the answers about the prince and even more, and with a playful wave invited Charlotte to fully rely on her knowledge as they begin to delve deeply into his past. The story begins with a simple picture book, lying on the tea table, a classic tale about a village boy who sets out on a journey to defeat the demon lord. And it was that same banal but so dear to a young heart fairy tale. 7-year-old Charlotte clutches that very book at a sunny garden party, her eyes anxiously searching the crowd for the one who gave it to her. She finds him 9-year-old Prince Lure and rushes to him to thank him for the gift, shouting his name with childlike excitement. She beams with a smile and tells him how much she liked the story, and he gently smiles back, pleased and happy to see her enthusiasm. The conversation turns to the themes of the book, and she thoughtfully says that the world would be better if everyone, even enemies, could just find a way to coexist in peace. Her eyes sparkle with ambition as she boldly declares that when she finally becomes queen, she will dedicate herself to creating a country where everyone can live in complete harmony. But the prince instantly changes. His face hardens, and he outright rejects her vision as a naive fantasy, warning that in real life things are rarely that simple. He continues his reproach. He says that dreams, though sweet, are ultimately empty, and the whims of the ruler can shatter the peace of the entire kingdom. Before she could respond, his duties called him. He left her alone, throwing a brief cold apology and disappearing into the crowd of guests. Left after his departure, she carries his words in her mind. They haunt her, and under the weight of his cynicism, she begins to doubt the ideals she once cherished so dearly. She noticed the book lying forgotten on a stone ledge, and aloud asked in surprise if someone had accidentally left it. She resolutely decided to become a queen worthy of this kingdom, and realizing she had outgrown these childish picture books, she turned away and left. She was already leaving when a voice asked if she had forgotten something, and this unexpected interruption made her flinch and become alert. Turning around, she suddenly realized the boy with the book was none other than Prince Alfred, the younger brother of Lure. The young prince praised the book, but she brushed off his kindness. It seemed to her that now was not the time for such distractions. He pressed her, asking why she was simply throwing away what he liked so much. She apologized dryly and explained that those empty ideals on those pages had no place in the harsh world. When he asked if those were just the words of his brother Lure, she sharply cut him off. She had no time to waste if she was to fulfill her royal duties. His accurate guess left her speechless for a moment, her eyes wide with surprise at his intuition. He began reading aloud a passage about never giving up, uttering the same words of the hero she once deeply admired. He continued, confessing that this book was dear to him and extended it to her. He said that the world is truly made by those hopeless idealists who genuinely try to make it better, and his voice was so sincere that she did not expect it. He handed her the volume as if giving a part of his heart and said the last encouragement, "At least give your dreams a chance before you decide to abandon them completely." The young prince barely waved his hand and left, leaving her with the thought that he eagerly awaited to see what future she would create as queen. Years later, she wanders the city streets in a simple cloak with a hood, beside her devoted maid. The memory of that first meeting with the prince is still vivid, like an anchor in her heart, while they, disguised and unnoticed, make their way through the noisy city in search of a certain place. Suddenly, her companion's clumsy step leads to a sharp collision with a passerby and a frightened scream is heard. And to their surprise, the man who turns around with a sharp, inquisitive look turns out to be the same prince from her memories, now an adult and in simple clothes, who asks what they are doing here. In a quiet back alley near the palace, a chance meeting brings the company together, and the maid, giggling mischievously, waved it off saying it's just a coincidence, although the place is strange and the timing of their appearance is too suspicious. She rushed forward to cover the lady from all accusations, insisting that this plan was her idea from the very beginning. The young prince listens silently, his face unreadable, and the maid pleadingly asks him not to be angry with her for interfering. Continuing to explain, the maid insists that it is quite natural for the betrothed to spend time observing each other's daily lives to strengthen their bond, and assures that the young noblewoman simply wanted to better understand the character of her future husband. He replied in a measured tone, acknowledging that as her fiancé he feels a certain duty to get to know her more deeply, but added that there is no point in stressing or deliberately changing routes just to cross paths in the city. This confession unsettled the young woman and filled her with doubts. She fears that in his eyes she may appear only as a boring and annoying presence, although she sincerely tries to establish their relationship and overcome the gap between them. Sensing the tension, the maid winked mischievously, silently signaling the lady to play the next move with her. She boldly and scandalously claims that the prince has a clear weakness for women with fuller figures, and pointing to her lady's chest, leaves the prince speechless and utterly humiliated by her audacity. A flash of emotions happens instantly. He loudly scolds the maid for her inappropriate words, while the young lady stands nearby, silently blushing with shame. Laughing and waving her hand as if to say it was just a slip of the tongue, the maid rushed to run away, and the prince hotly chased after her. The young woman in the suit watches them quarrel and run around. She realizes that despite the constant friction between them, they actually have an extremely close bond, and marvels at how well they understand each other even amid this chaos and absurdity. She listens attentively as the maid suggests a way to shorten the distance between her and the prince, to address him more personally in order to get closer. The proposal to call him Alkun caught her by surprise. Her eyes opened wide, thoughts raced, as she pondered whether she would dare to take such a bold and informal step with someone from the royal family. She hesitates while the prince watches from afar, sensing another of the maid's strange and persistent antics unfolding. Summoning courage, she whispered the nickname through a deep blush, and he jumped, stunned by the sudden, unexpected closeness. Seeing that she had opened up, the maid presses even harder and with a joyful sparkle in her eyes, suggests he respond in kind to call his fiancée Char, to complete the exchange. He immediately recoils from the thought, shouts no, while the two women lean forward with eyes shining with anticipation, not letting him go. Though he protests loudly, a blush creeps up his neck, and he mumbles how incredibly embarrassed he is about the whole affair. The maid does not relent, reproaching him for his coldness to the simple request of the young lady, until he finally sighs, surrendering and prepares to give in. He hints, his face burning with shame, squeezes out the shortened name, his voice barely a whisper, succumbing to incredible pressure. This small victory made the two women shine with happiness. Their hearts were warmed by the reluctant but sincere display of the prince's feelings. He feels his heart pounding as Charlotte beams, and joyfully calls him by the new nickname. This closeness is almost too much for him. So to pull himself together, he changes the subject and asks why they followed him to the noisy city square. In response to his question, Machina suddenly pulls out a scandalous book and squeals with joy, showing that she found it hidden in his room, teasing him with jokes about him going out to buy more such things, while Charlotte watches this with mixed surprise and growing curiosity. In response to this awkward discovery, he quickly pushes the book away, calls her an idiot, and insists that such an indecent thing is not worth paying attention to. However, Charlotte does not back down so easily. She begs him to show it, saying that as his fiancée, she has the right to understand every facet of his personality. Humiliation presses on him, and he hunches forward. Their relentless teasing has won. Makino continues mocking his so-called secret hobby, and Charlotte becomes serious and asks why he is so mysterious about his direction if it's not just a trip for books F. When the air around tenses, he raises his head, his face sharp and focused, and says, "I am not wandering aimlessly nor seeking forbidden things. In fact, I am here with one purpose, gathering information." A local merchant, leaning over the counter, whispers gossip about a scandal. The third Prince Spearding took the Duchess right from under the nose of Prince Lure. Hearing the rumors, the prince himself smiled. He found it funny that common people see him as a threat, while he casually walked the market with his retinue. His frivolity momentarily confuses the young Duchess, and her maid. They do not know how to react to such indifferent attitude towards serious accusations. He continues explaining, confessing that through these familiar shops he catches public opinion and watches his brother's reputation. While speaking, he offers the Duchess a fresh apple, which she cautiously bites. He admits that he initially planned to investigate alone, but her company is a pleasant change of pace. The Duchess, whose face flushed with a deep blush, finds the simple fruit strangely tasty while pondering his unexpected kindness. Their walk finally brings them to a magnificent stone building, which he proudly calls the local Adventurers Guild. Upon entering, they find themselves amid the clatter of voices and the smell of hearty food, a lively place where the prince says information flows as freely as beer. And the Duchess looks around in awe, her eyes sparkling in a world she had only read about in stories. The smiling administrator Magi warmly welcomes them, balancing several frothy mugs and showing a table deep in the hall. She talks about a successful dungeon raid, to which the prince politely nods and leads his company further inside. The Duchess gazes around enchanted, her eyes jumping from bright bottles behind the bar to the quest board covered with notices, and every detail of this rough, noisy place seems incredibly fascinating to her. Finally, he leads them to a cozy corner, noting that the guild's proximity to the tavern makes this place ideal for adventurers to celebrate victories and share secrets. He watches as Charlotte enchantedly examines the menu, her eyes wide open in amazement, dishes she had only seen before in books. Makina encourages her to order whatever she likes, and Alfred finds her genuine admiration quite interesting. Seeing the mistress so captivated, the maid quietly whispers to the prince that this walk is just a necessary distraction from the pain of a broken engagement, and he still skeptically mutters under his breath whether the lady's intentions are really that simple or if she is just trying to study him. She playfully continues to tease, winking to hint that he should reward her efforts even with a raise. Behind her cheerful mask hides sharp wit as she says she is making moves on behalf of her lady. Despite her teasing, he sincerely thanks her for the help. The maid accepts the thanks with a smile, and Charlotte looks at this, a little confused by the relaxed atmosphere of the tavern. A moment of calm is suddenly shattered by an unexpected event that catches him off guard. Nearby, the young Duchess begins to tremble, her composure melting as a wave of anxiety sweeps through the room. He turns to the maid and sincerely thanks her for her constant support and foresight. She, blushing, replies that his plans often go beyond what she can handle, and for a moment, a rare mutual respect arises between them. Feeling her anxiety growing, he reached out to support her. His grip was firm but reassuring. She was silent, looking away and trying to understand how everything between them began to change. Finally, she finds her voice and quietly but sharply reproaches. His unexpected kindness throws her off balance. He looks attentively, noticing the blush on her cheeks and the struggle in her eyes as she tries to maintain a noble mask. Their private moment was interrupted by a loud shout. An old acquaintance, Kevin, slapped him on the shoulder in a friendly greeting. The sudden arrival of other adventurers forced a change of tactics, and Charlotte instantly stepped forward, calling herself his fiancée to keep up the cover. The name seemed to catch the newcomer. He allowed wonders where he had heard it before. Panic flashed in his eyes, and he desperately tries to distract his friend so he does not connect the facts and realize who this woman beside him really is. He stands nearby tense, while the noisy adventurer with a friendly smile greets the hooded girl and shortens her name to Chow. The prince watches as he says she has probably had a hard time lately, and she noticeably trembles under the cloak, barely responding with an uncertain greeting. When he turns back, a wave of cold sweat runs down his neck. The adventuress continues to speak, not noticing how panic rises in him, and notes that her name strangely resembles the name of that infamous duchess who, they say, mocked a simple girl. Kevin slammed his mug on the table. His voice thundered through the tavern as he tore apart Duchess Mercen, insisting that her noble origin meant nothing if she treated commoners like a pair to be blown away, and called her quite the character. Next to him, Alfred reaches out to Charlotte, who is hunched under her hood. She is silent, eyes wide with fear and uncertainty as the prince's hand reaches for her. He does not relent, loudly praising Prince Lure for having the sense to leave such a woman, calling the third prince a coward who is unnecessary to the kingdom, overshadowing him before the golden cauldron and the rest of the royal brothers and sisters, while Charlotte grips her glass so tightly that the joints of her fingers turned white. He directs his attention straight to Alfred and asks what he thinks about it, then bursts out laughing and says the world would be better if the Duchess and the third prince simply died. He shrugged off with laughter, his face bright and carefree, as if those rumors were not true at all, and Charlotte stands in disbelief, pale from realizing how easily he hides his true feelings. With a sharp, almost predatory smile, Alfred throws out that he would not be so troubled if the humiliation were directed only at him. And Kevin, unaware of who his companion really is, says that although some rumors paint the Duchess as a victim, his wide network of adventurers suggests a very different, darker truth. Reviewing the day's events in his mind, Alfred thought with satisfaction about the success of his intrigue. Having arranged with influential guild figures and planted rumors in the right ears, he presented recent scandals as a conspiracy of the evil Third Prince, thereby diverting public condemnation from Charlotte. Later, the trio makes their way through the cobblestone streets under the midday sun. The plan worked perfectly, but Charlotte walks with noticeable heaviness, as if burdened by the weight of lies and human hatred toward Alfred. She breaks the silence, quietly addressing Charlotte as they follow the prince, insisting that despite his cold calculation and terrible gossip, deep down Alfred is not a bad person at all. She apologizes for the tension of the walk, saying that Charlotte had only hoped for a simple change of scenery. Alfred is silent, looking ahead and painfully realizing the consequences of his sacrificial lie. He turned away and left, his back turned to the young woman who stood tiny against the backdrop of the castle. Her voice was quiet as she apologized, but he just waved it off and told her not to think about it. As he moved on, her voice began to tremble, a sound that moved him inside despite his resolve. He knew what she wanted, but gathered his courage, silently acknowledging that he simply could not do what she asked. Later, alone with his thoughts, the burden of the day's events finally fell on him. He scolded himself for his recklessness, and realized that just because she seemed to be having fun, he should not have let his guard down regarding the rumors he himself had deliberately spread. The night's silence gave him no comfort. He sat hunched over the table, and the castle towers loomed outside the window. Then he decided it was better not to see her for a while, and painfully regretted allowing the mood to completely spoil their walk. The next day, attention shifted to the military drills. The rhythmic clanking of armor and sharp orders from officers filled the air. In the courtyard, the strikes of wooden training swords against shields echoed off the stone walls, while the guards honed their skills under the midday sun. Suddenly, he turned and found himself face to face with the very person he was trying to avoid, Charlotte, standing next to her devoted maid, and this completely caught him off guard. His calm instantly shattered, thoughts raced, trying to understand why she was here. She looked up at him, and her face showed a mixture of hesitation and determination. Embarrassed, he again fell into his old habit and sharply asked why she was wandering here instead of studying. And as soon as the words left his mouth, he was pierced by a pang of regret and scolded himself for not knowing how to speak to her gently. She was not frightened by his harsh tone. On the contrary, she calmly explained that observing the army was a necessary part of her training as a future queen, and this left him speechless for a moment. She stands momentarily silent from the thick, heavy silence, and Makina steps forward, sharply reproaching him, asking where the prince's manners are. An obvious awkwardness hangs between them. Alfred froze, visibly sweating, unable to find an answer to the maid's direct accusation. Alfred stands at the edge of the training field, his gaze fixed on the soldiers' training, while Charlotte and Makina watch him from a few steps away. Charlotte approaches him and asks why he came to the training ground and what business he has here. He explains that his interest is not merely personal. He is here to see with his own eyes the strength of the kingdom's forces, not just to record fencing techniques. He passionately explains why his observation is a strategic necessity. Only by knowing the exact capabilities and limits of his soldiers can victory be guaranteed, and the best result achieved when the unexpected appears on the battlefield. He begins to analyze the men on the field in detail, sharply pointing out, one measured fighter cannot keep up with the speed, while another has a strong stance but lacks quick reactions. He continues the analysis, highlighting a soldier who skillfully approaches the opponent, but due to footwork, his strikes remain careless and easily predictable. His insight clearly shakes Charlotte. She understands that he has managed to calculate the habits and weak points of every soldier on the battlefield. He suddenly flinched when Makina jokingly accused him of lechery for staring so intently and forced him to justify himself for gathering data on the recruit. The arrival of Lure disrupts the young prince's concentration. He mockingly addressed his brother, called him a skittish rat, and demanded to know what he was doing. Faced with his brother's hostility, he considers options and suspects that casting a smoke screen spell is the best way to quickly escape the inevitable confrontation. He decides to temporarily play by their rules, biting his pride and kneeling to avoid provoking an even greater, closer clash. Returning to his faithful servant, he entrusts Makina with Charlotte's safety, while the young Duchess looks at him with obvious anxiety. To be, she leans closer and whispers, surprised that he hasn't fled, yet she thought he would have disappeared long ago, not stood his ground. He gives her a reassuring look and tells her not to worry, saying he has long been accustomed to his brother's difficult and predictable character. Tension breaks through as temptation looms over them, and his irritation boils when Alfred addresses him so familiarly that it deeply humiliates the elder prince. The elder prince does not relent. He hotly accuses the younger of the family's disgrace and threatens to knock sense into him, while Alfred only shakes his head. There is no evidence, and he is not impressed. Again challenging the baseless accusations, The younger prince receives a sharp order to arm himself, and a wooden training sword plops at his feet. Legs, the elder prince grimly declares that he is going to give Alfred a thrashing, and Alfred only sighs heavily at the very thought of how much strength this fight will take. Angry at what he perceives as cowardice, the elder prince twisted his face in rage, feeling as if his brother was mocking him because of his indifference. Finally yielding, the dark-haired prince agrees to the duel. But before it begins, he insists on one special condition. Alfred sets the terms of the duel. He insists on a real blade, while his brother takes a wooden training sword. Lure snorts at this proposal and confidently agrees to such a disadvantage, and the guards around whisper about Alfred's dishonor. A worried servant warns him about the obvious danger of the situation, but he is calm and says that a coward like his brother poses no real threat. In response, Alfred smiles fiercely and mockingly asks what will happen if his hand slips in the heat of battle. He simply brushed off the mockery like empty barking, narrowed his eyes, and prepared for the fight. The two brothers stood facing each other in the center of the castle courtyard, tension literally sparking between them, and the duel began before the gathered crowd. With a sudden burst of energy, he lunged forward, the wooden sword whistling through the air as he delivered a powerful overhead strike. The blow is deflected with a sharp clang. Alfred raises his steel blade to intercept the attack, the force of the collision trembling in his hands, and the spectators roar, wishing for Lure to crush his opponent. The prince himself realizes that his brother's defense is stronger than he expected. He continues to withstand the storm of attacks. His movements precise and economical, he parries every aggressive strike from Lure. His eyes are fixed on his brother's movements, searching for a gap amid the barrage of wooden and metal strikes. Watching from the side, Charlotte grows somber, her sudden silence prompting the guard to ask if everything is all right. Suddenly, Max Hina approaches her and asks if she noticed anything strange in the battle. Charlotte says that Alfred's sword seems to be damaged or covered with some strange film, and it won't hold for long like that. Suddenly she realized, Alfred is not just accidentally parrying, he is deliberately catching the bait strikes exactly on the same part of his blade every time. She watches intently as Alfred tenses, his thoughts racing to decipher the true intentions of the opponent while their blades remain locked in a tense standoff. Suddenly, the fierce, jerky strike of the first prince crashed down on Himhai's roar echoed across the courtyard, and their blades clashed with a sharp metallic screech. The stunning power of the prince takes the viewer's breath away, and the crack of something echoes in the Ira sign of the sudden and brutal end of the exchange of blows. They look, not believing their eyes. The blow throws him back, he clutches his chest, and the crowd erupts with applause and shouts, admiring how an ordinary wooden training sword managed to shatter steel. He tries to keep his balance under the roar of the crowd, and she only suspiciously whispers to the one nearby that the defeat looked too convenient, as if he lost on purpose. Her suspicions only grow when he looks at his brother with a smug, condescending smile and demands apologies now that the duel is over, and the prince who lost remains defiant. They are interrupted by a stranger who looks at the exchange with a cold, calculating gaze, then lets a white glove slip off his fingers, a clear sign of his intentions. He points his finger directly at the prince on his knees, and his voice suddenly cuts through the air with a sharp challenge, and the entire court falls into a stunning silence. The mysterious opponent stood firm, extending a white glove as an official challenge to a duel. He said that victory would free him from a long investigation and force the prince to admit guilt and publicly apologize along with Charlotte. Alfred looks back, his thoughts racing as he studies the man before him, whether a hero or a villain, and the proposed terms are almost impossible to accept. He tries to prove that the claimant has no evidence against him, but the man sharply replies, Alfred's attitude already says a lot, and refusing the duel will only reveal that he is hiding something from the gathered crowd. A cold realization overwhelmed the prince when he looked into the claimant's eyes. He clearly understands the trap. Agreeing to the duel puts everything at stake, while refusing only supports the suspicions of the soldiers watching them. In this uneven situation, no path to a clear advantage is visible. His fist clenched tightly as the irritation from being cornered boiled under his skin. Finally, he yields to the pressure and agrees to the duel, but sets his own condition. The opponent is clearly surprised by such a sudden response. Yet the two men stood at a distance from each other, the air thickening with tension as they finalized the terms of the fight. Alfred's gaze falls on the heavy collar locked around Charlotte's neck. He feels that the opponent holds the key to her freedom. This tool for criminals is a cruel thing, a magical seal that renders her powerless. He felt sorry, imagining how hard it was for her when the magic she had honed for so many years was suddenly taken away. She was still shackled by the magical collar holding her to the ceiling, and the opponent understood this was his chance to bargain for her freedom. Since there was no universal key for these shackles, the only way to free her was to obtain the key that Prince Lure had. He mockingly swung a white glove before the opponent, as if asking if there was anything to hide, and was convinced there would be no refusal. The opponent set the terms. Victory would mean the removal of the collar, although he scornfully dismissed the prince's slim chances. The prince agreed with a grim expression and simply said that it would be so. He announced that the duel would take place in 2 weeks, and his gaze was firm and unwavering. Resigned to the delay, the young man only quietly said goodbye to him until that day. The sun scorched the castle's battlements, and the last warning voice sounded in the air. "Prince, prepare for the trials that lie ahead." In the decorated palace corridor, a voice sounded, urgently calling the maid. Makina intercepts Charlotte and says that Prince Lure requests her immediate presence. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the young Duchess decides to confront him face to face to uncover the truth behind the recent chaos. She turned back to the maid, determination shone on her face, but doubt still wandered in her eyes. Outside, looking up at the large chandelier, one nagging question haunts her. Why did Alfred deliberately choose to lose the duel? When she realized that he had gone so far as to interfere with his own weapon, she was stunned. His motives seemed unfathomable and seemingly self-destructive. Feeling the inner turmoil of her mistress, the maid remains restrained and seems to know more. Her gaze holds the key to the secret. When asked why someone would take such extreme measures to ruin their own reputation, the maid revealed the icy truth. It was all for Prince Lure. She explains that Alfred deliberately took on the role of a coward and vile villain, sacrificing his own honor and reputation to make his brother a hero savior. This coldly calculated move aimed to portray the young Duchess as merely a victim caught in a dark conspiracy, further justifying the elder prince's intervention in the eyes of the court. Thus, soldiers who have seen everything and did not suspect the deception will involuntarily give their unconditional loyalty to Prince Lure. She continues to explain, noting that such behavior is not new for Alfred. He has always been a shadow that highlights the shine of Lure. Because of the status of a cursed child, he hid in the shadows and used his bad reputation so that the royal family would shine even brighter. And Charlotte is clearly worried. She cannot understand why someone would sacrifice all their well-being for this. This loyalty was born out of love for his family, stronger than anything else, that thread that once held them all together in moments of shared peace. To Charlotte's surprise, the maid explained that the breaking of the engagement was a calculated step to save the reputation of the royal family. Alfred consciously took on the curse and public anger to preserve the peace and stability of the kingdom. She asks if truly playing the villain is the only way he considers effective, and the maid confirms. By taking the blame for the recent uproar, Alfred allowed Lure to avoid any negative consequences. Charlotte feels the weight of family loyalty, but she is not convinced. Couldn't one act humanely, rather than through such self-destruction? When she realized that in Alfred's mind there really might be no other way, she was shaken, and her eyes opened wide with pity and disbelief. A heavy silence fell between them both, deep in thought, understood the grim truth of the path the prince had chosen. Breaking the silence, the maid admits that although the engagement was quite unexpected, it has recently given her a rare feeling of optimism. She looks at Charlotte with new strength in her eyes, sincerely hoping that this union will finally become a catalyst for real change in Alfred's life. She leads to the prince's chambers, announcing their arrival with her usual energy, and behind her walks the young Duchess, her face clouded with doubt, as the maid's words about the prince's tragic past echoed in her memory. Entering, they see the prince in deep humility. His head bowed low, hands joined in sincere apology, deeply regretting that he dragged the Duchess into the very center of this royal chaos, and his face is covered with sweat from the force of repentance. Strength, despite his gloomy tone, the maid bursts with joy. She understands that now they have a way to remove the collar and clear the Duchess's name. The prince remains grounded, reminding that although this is a breakthrough, their trouble is far from resolved and darkness still prevails. He turns to the door, the wood creaks under his hand as he pushes it, and his thoughts rush to the duel. Knowing that the Duchess's future is now tied to his own, he decides defeat is not an option, and he will do everything to succeed. Returning to his companions, he suddenly ordered both to prepare for immediate departure. The order froze in their minds. Their eyes widened in shared surprise as they tried to comprehend the sudden change of plans. He moved down the corridor. The Duchess shouted and asked where they were going. And without looking back, he answered that his business was not yet finished. One more important task must be completed before they can truly move on. Forward, with a gaze where fear merged with determination, his sharp features and pointed ears only intensified the tension, and he revealed his next move. He intends to meet the Duchess's parents too. Directly, this statement left both women speechless. Their hands flew to their faces, shock and disbelief in their eyes at how boldly his plan challenged the high-ranking mercenaries. The family high above the castle walls. The maid's voice rang joyfully, teasing that they finally behaved like true betrothed. And below, the prince simply urged them on, asking to hurry, his thoughts already on the difficult meeting ahead. The horse-drawn carriage clatters along the dusty path, the rhythm of hooves marking the start of an important journey. Inside the cabin, Makina smiles mischievously, clenching her hands and teasing Alfred that the reality of his engagement is finally sinking in. He cast a sharp, defensive look at her, his face a mix of irritation and embarrassment, and asked why she was only speaking about it now. The conversation grows more serious as the group discusses the upcoming meeting with Charlotte's parents, although the arrangement was official from the start. This visit suddenly makes it much more real. The young prince tries to keep calm, while in the background Charlotte and Makina giggle, seeing through the cold mask he put on just for her. Their journey finally ends. The carriage approaches the grand gates of the merchant estate, Charlotte's family home. Sitting in the elegant living room where a butler served him, Alfred began to lay out his intentions, saying he had several specific goals for this visit. Taking a measured sip of tea, he explained. Although the parents had already discussed the engagement, he felt it was his duty to come personally and offer congratulations. He is inwardly tormented by rumors about the absurd duel spreading like wildfire, and he is eager to explain everything himself before the truth gets lost. Suddenly, he changes the subject and asks Charlotte about her relationship with his father, the king, hinting that his real purpose is far more important than mere social niceties. He sits calmly next to Charlotte and Makina in the living room. Suddenly, the silence is broken by a formal greeting addressed to him. The voice belonged to Mercenary himself, the Duke, who entered apologizing for the delay. As a sign of mutual respect, the prince stood and also apologized for arriving unannounced, but the Duke quickly waved off formalities and suggested speaking frankly. The Duke burst into loud laughter, settling into the room, sincerely thanking the young man for his attention, and noting that both seemed not to care much about the strict expectations of their noble status. They found common ground in simplicity and lack of ostentatious mannerisms. Turning his attention to his daughter, the Duke remarked with a penetrating look that she seemed strangely comfortable next to the prince, and this comment caught her off guard. Her face flushed with surprise and embarrassment. Feeling the need to clarify everything, the prince began to explain the story of their connection. He recalled how during the stifling and overly formal events of the royal palace he often became a refuge for her. It was in those quiet moments, away from the inquisitive eyes of the court, that their bond first began to form. This revelation momentarily shocks the Duke, had no idea about those secret meetings. The prince continues and explains that their relationship grew naturally through simple conversations in those stolen moments of peace. He adds that secrecy was a conscious choice for Prince Lyra's sake. He advised her to keep their meetings secret to avoid creating unnecessary problems. But his face becomes stern and resolute. He says that these warnings are no longer needed. The time to hide their connection has passed. Now everything has become public. With a solemn posture, he stands straight and addresses the Duke directly, declaring himself Charlotte's fiancé. Imagine, he is sitting opposite the Duke, who already knows about the recent duel. The older man looks stern and makes it clear that an apology is in order, but hints that the duel is not the only thing to talk about. He is amazed at how quickly the news spread, wonders to himself that the Duke must have extraordinary sources since he already knows about the event that happened just yesterday, and adds that this knowledge will surely hasten their conversation. Seizing the moment, the Duke leaned forward and unexpectedly directly asked. He wants to meet the person called the legendary jeweler. A sudden question shook them for a moment as they sat together at the tea table. Alfred glanced at the Duke. Thoughts racing through his mind, was trying to understand the motive behind such a specific and risky demand. Alfred confirms Charlotte's suspicion. The mysterious figure is a jeweler, a legendary craftsman who forges magical rings. He narrows his eyes, his face fills with seriousness, is preparing to delve into the history of these artifacts. He explains that magical rings are much more than jewelry. They are vessels of mana, the very instruments that first allowed humanity to step into the boundless world of magic. He described the jeweler as a master who forged the very foundations of their society from raw manastins. But the true master disappeared long ago and left the craft to the apprentice. Later, he reported this information to Duke Mercenary, and he was impressed. The prince knew about such a delicate matter, the possible return of the jeweler to the royal workshop. His hand clenched tightly on his knee, as the conversation turned to the details of the negotiations currently underway with the Mercenary family. He boldly makes a move and directly asks the Duke to allow him to take over the negotiations himself. The Duke's eyes narrow, he looks intently at the prince, trying to guess the true motive behind this sudden and important request. He listens as Alfred clarifies his intentions. The duel with Lyra is imminent, and the tactical advantage of the legendary ring simply cannot be overlooked. He strokes his chin thoughtfully. He knows that although his family is handling this matter, they themselves could replace the chief negotiator for such an ambitious prince. The Duke listens carefully, and the young prince, trying to speak completely frankly, has a tense expression on his face from the weight of the request he is about to make. He squints and states in a cold, even voice that trust is not given to a member of the royal family just like that. This sharp refusal makes his daughter straighten up from shock. Her voice breaks as she calls him, and he calmly asks her to remain seated and calm down. Turning his gaze back to the prince, the Duke could not help but acknowledge the incredible talent of that young woman, and because of this, his loyalty became even more complicated. He recalls her birth, That joy they had a dear daughter with a rare silver mana, a treasure they once wanted to dedicate to faithful service to the crown they revered. But this bond of service was broken by a single devastating betrayal in the past. So now, sitting opposite the prince, he is cautiously wary. The prince can only silently observe, tension readable on his face, as the Duke confesses he cannot rid himself of deep doubts about the royal family's intentions. The young woman clenches her dress in silent despair, and her father admits he was forced to rethink the very meaning of his loyalty to the liberal line. He throws down a direct challenge. Despite the crown's faults, his daughter still steadfastly believes in the prince, and he demands to know how the young man intends to justify this trust. The prince, aware of his dark reputation, admits that as a cursed child and one considered a villain, his words carry little weight, but he recognizes the seriousness of the Duke's suspicion. He meets the Duke's gaze with a challenge on his lips, smiles boldly, and does not yield, even when the old man doubts his resolve and asks if he will finally give up. Unyielding, he takes out a shimmering object and slides it across the table. The metal catches the light and flashes with a magical gleam. The sight of the artifact took the Duke's breath away. He immediately recognized the legendary ring cross, and Charlotte gasped, realizing that such an important royal treasure was being used as a bargaining chip. Makina and Charlotte plunge into a panic-stricken confusion over the unauthorized use of the family relic, while he remains completely calm, casually suggesting to consider the priceless ring merely as collateral for their deal. The Duke, clasping his hands before his face, fervently demands to know the true intent of this venture and forces him to explain that the ring is a vessel of powerful spirits and a guarantee of sincerity regarding Charlotte's future. He posed a hypothetical question about his own possible greed, but the Duke waved it off. I don't believe it. He trusts the honest nature of the young man, a trait he recognized in Charlotte's father. After a minute of oppressive silence, the Duke finally relents. His consent seems to dissolve the tension among the three of them as they stand in the dim light. Taking the ring in his hands, the Duke examined its exquisite craftsmanship and the magical stone inside, promising to guard the royal treasure with the seriousness and responsibility it deserves. When they agreed, he smiled slyly, calming his comrades. Even without a ring, he has a hidden trump card that will ensure their success in the trials. The Duke felt the depth of the young prince's foresight and understood that every step he took had been carefully thought out long before this meeting. He politely asks the prince to lead the negotiations with the legendary jeweler acting on behalf of the Mercen house. Alfred accepts the task with a sharp, confident smile, his eyes shining with anticipation. Alfred Berglevel, the third prince, arrives at the Duke of Mercen's estate by the king's order and solemnly declares that he is the appointed negotiator, a sharp, calculated expression playing on his face. In the luxurious living room, he sits opposite the Duke, the air heavy with the weight of their upcoming conversation. The solemnity of the setting makes the seriousness of the alliance they are about to form even more palpable. The two men met eyes and sank into a heavy silence, each measuring the other's resolve. The Duke's gaze was piercing, searching for even the slightest hint of weakness or deceit in the young prince. Suddenly, the Duke broke the tension with a loud laugh. His stern face softened, and a sincere smile appeared, catching the prince somewhat off guard. He admits that the previous hostility was merely a test to check to see if the prince was worthy of protecting his daughter Charlotte, sincerely apologizes for the deceit, and solemnly entrusts her care to the young man. Exhaling a held breath, the prince confesses that he suspected such a test might occur, and decisively says he is ready to accept any consequences of this dangerous alliance. The Duke looks at him with genuine respect, no longer seeing the need for penance or talks about consequences. Trust in the prince's character grows in his eyes. While sipping tea, the Duke made a remark about the prince's sharp, sometimes sly nature, and the young man Nadedth's trait is necessary. Then he spoke an undeniable truth directly and without hesitation. The royal family has already betrayed the Mercens. Switching focus to business, the prince inquired when the official negotiations would begin, and the Duke, smiling warmly and hospitably, offered him to stay overnight at the estate so they could prepare everything well. He kindly accepts the invitation and sincerely thanks the Duke. The old man emphasizes that staying here is also advantageous from a tactical point of view. The prince will be safe, out of the direct reach of Prince Lur. He lays out the plan for the night. He will take a separate room and Charlotte will settle in the guest quarters. Nearby, Makina continues to eat with appetite, as if all these formalities do not bother her at all. He narrowed his gaze and carefully scanned the surroundings. The estate provided a brief respite from immediate danger, but he knew well, it was not worth lowering vigilance at all. The silence is shattered by Makina, bursting with excitement. She and Charlotte must stay awake until dawn, a night of girlish talks. Since Charlotte cannot use magic now, Alfred decides that the maid will be her personal companion for the night, but privately warns that the energy of this girl might be too turbulent. Charlotte only giggles at such a proposal and assures him that she is quite pleased in the company of the maid. He sighs heavily and reminds both that they have a long journey tomorrow, so they should think about sleep. He watches them, thinking about the strange temperament of the maid. although outwardly she often looks like just a cheerful prankster. He knows the truth, she is one of his most formidable and capable subordinates. Now when Charlotte is defenseless, there is no one he would trust to guard her at night. Although it was night, suddenly a wave of horror overwhelmed him. He noticeably shuddered. All he can do is pray that the talkative maid during their late conversation does not reveal any embarrassing secret or unnecessary detail about his past. Outside, the world freezes under the watchful eye of the sickle moon. The majestic silhouette of the Mercen estate towers against the night sky. The windows glow softly as the inhabitants settle in. In the cozy guest room, two young women have changed from formal dresses into soft nightgowns. Charlotte, clutching a pillow and beaming with a smile, confesses that she has always admired girlish chatter from afar and finally wants to experience it herself. She genuinely shines with joy and admits, having a close person nearby to share such moments with is a new and very pleasant experience for her, because before she never truly had anyone she could trust. She listens as the maid reminds her to keep track of time, and she herself recalls the prince's words about an early start tomorrow and not staying up too late. They agreed to speak briefly, both settled in to find a balance between excitement and the necessary rest before the next day. But the maid got so enthusiastic that she immediately suggested diving into a conversation about the recent engagement, and the noblewoman began to fidget nervously as the real women's chatter finally started. Confused by the straightforwardness of the topic, she gets lost searching for the right words, while her thoughts race wildly trying to make sense of the sudden change in conversation and that unexpected closeness. Feeling that she could share more, the maid playfully suggested revealing all the prince's secrets, even his most hidden collections and clever hiding places. Instead of chasing those secrets, she asks a more personal question, inquiring about the story between the maid and the prince and how they first met. They look at each other. She notices the question seems to catch the maid off guard. Awkwardness arises. The story is downplayed, and she quickly apologizes for intruding on what might have been a painful memory. Memories? After a short pause to gather her thoughts, the maid decides to share the truth, searching for the simplest words to explain the depth of their past connection. With a bright, nostalgic smile, she reveals the essence of their bond. The prince was the one who found her when she was lost or in need. She confirms this with a simple nod, her face calm as she sits opposite the young duchess. Charlotte, on the edge of the bed, repeats the word with a hint of embarrassment, trying to understand what it means to be found by the prince. Charlotte Mercene sifts through the fragments of her past and realizes, apart from her own name, her memories are empty, and the very first image that emerges in her mind is her endured hardships, which sharply contrast with her current life. She sees herself as a small child, hunched on a cold, dirty floor, where the only constant was the empty pain of hunger and the smell of earth. The world seemed cruel and lonely for an orphan who had nothing. Her days were a desperate game of survival, forced to steal crumbs of food and copper coins just to wait for the next dawn. Although she was clever and much more resourceful than she seemed, luck eventually ran out. The vengeful seller caught her red-handed and unleashed a merciless Biadinga brutal price for her attempt to survive. The violence was swift and relentless, leaving her broken on the street. Turning back to the present, she shares these dark memories with Hina, confessing that when she was a thief, she was driven only by the hunger that consumed her, and she shudders at the thought of what would have happened if her path had not crossed with the royal person. Memory shifts to the arrival of an unexpected savior. Alfred, the third prince, accidentally found himself there, and as if nothing special, asked the shopkeeper if he was selling the sack of sand he had been so diligently fighting over. His appearance was equally sudden and commanding. Without hesitating for a moment, he threw a heavy bag of gold to the stuntman and declared that the beaten girl was his. It seemed crazy, but it changed her life forever. She smiles softly, noticing how that strange deal became the topic of the entire capital and secured the prince's reputation as an eccentric who collects human sacks. For the world it was a scandal, but for her salvation. The maid quietly laughed. Such a bold and strange act perfectly suited her master's character. Charlotte continued the story, telling how he gave her the bare essentials: food, clothing, and shelter, hiring her as his personal maid. The stern words of the prince became a shield for Herbie, calling her merely a tool. He silenced those who doubted her place in the palace. Under his stern but protective gaze, the nameless orphan transformed into a woman with a future, warmed by the warmth and acceptance of the other servants. She listens close. The conversation takes a certain turn, and simple agreement hangs in the air. Mackinac recalls the past and sees parallels between how Charlotte once suffered because of Prince Lure and how Alfred intervened then. She notices that the prince has a habit of playing the villain to protect others, and his self-sacrifice now evokes a strange, almost nostalgic longing. The maid's energy suddenly changed. She declared that romance is the most captivating topic of any girl's conversation. Charlotte froze in surprise when the conversation suddenly turned to her personal life. A knowing look flashed across her face. Her eyes sparkled curiosity mixed with slight anxiety over the course of the questions. Machina leans closer and presses, demanding the truth about her feelings for Master Alfred. The question hangs heavily in the air: what does she really think about the man who saved her? The conversation shifts to the essence of their engagement. Political marriages rarely touch the heart, but Makino says that after the bitterness of the previous engagement, Charlotte's decision to become Alfred's bride seems something deeper, perhaps even a hint of romantic attraction. Then she shifted slightly, averted her gaze, and quietly confessed that everything is much more complicated. There are a lot of things involved here, not just emotions. The questioning becomes even more direct when Makino aloud asks if she has begun to see the prince not only as a savior but as a man. A long silence falls. She closes her eyes and searches her heart for an answer that may have eluded her until this moment. Finally, she admits that she had never truly thought of looking at it from that angle, and the air between them fills with quiet, thoughtful uncertainty. She waves her hands confusedly and flusteredly, while her maid sadly says that she sees Master Alfred only as a friend. She explains that because of her upbringing, romantic feelings did not fit into her life. Her path was always about duty and a long-standing engagement to Prince Lur, so although from afar she admired stories of mutual love, all the time she was fully focused on proving she was worthy of the first prince and never truly saw romance for herself. She feels completely different, in contrast to her own strict path, and notices that Master Alfred was never burdened by the intricacies of political marriages. Her companion nods, agreeing that for a true prince, being his bride is the highest honor. The maid cannot hold back and laughs. It turns out Alfred had complete freedom to feel true love. This remark completely caught the young noblewoman by surprise. The conversation suddenly takes a sharp turn. The maid casually says that Alfred may already have someone he loves, and the lady freezes in shock. Sensing the tension, the maid quickly tries to steer the conversation to the late hour and suggests going to sleep, but the lady is now too intrigued to let the topic go. Plop, despite the reminder of the early morning, she insists that she doesn't mind sitting a little longer to get to the truth. Suddenly, the maid interrupts the conversation and quickly throws herself under the blanket, cheerfully shouting good night, while her mistress remains standing, unable to believe her own eyes. Safe, annoyed by this sudden retreat, she protests. It is unfair that the one who started the conversation about the girl falls asleep so easily. She demands a clear answer and does not allow the secret of Alfred's heart to remain unsolved. High above the quiet estate, her voice floats into the night she suffers, trying to understand whom Alfred loves, while below the prince himself suddenly sneezes, unaware of the storm he has caused in the room above. Night has fallen on the majestic estate, the crescent moon hung high in the silent sky. Inside, Charlotte rests peacefully, her long pale hair spread out on the pillow like a fan as she sleeps. Not far away on the windowsill he sits, gazing into the darkness and slowly sipping a drink. From the shadow in the doorway she watches him. On her face is a quiet, lingering worry. She quietly whispers his name, and in her eyes reflects a deep concern for the prince, who looks so restless. Later, the Duke of Mercen meets with the prince to discuss the upcoming journey. He says that the famous jeweler they are going to loves a quiet life and has already refused to receive an official delegation, so he advises not to travel with a squad of knights, while Alfred meanwhile is clearly puzzled and asks why apologies or such caution are even necessary. He retorts that his subordinates will provide more than enough security, and with a note of pragmatism, adds that he does not even have the right to command the Royal Knight Order. Understanding the situation, the Duke insists on going together with his only daughter to protect her. Alfred accepts this gesture and calmly assures that the path to empty everything is not too treacherous. The conversation suddenly breaks off from a sharp sneeze. The Duke immediately asked if he had caught a cold, and Alfred waved it off, secretly suspecting that his energetic maid Makina must be behind it, who somewhere is causing trouble or gossiping about him. The older man swallows his tea and thoughtfully thinks about his daughter's life. She has no peers, and he sincerely admits that as a father he is incredibly grateful that she has found a true friend in Makena. He noticed that night had already fallen deeply, and gently hinted to the young prince that with an early rise, it was probably time to end the meeting. The prince responded only with a silent, thoughtful look. Because the elder suddenly pondered how the father feels when his daughter gets married, the prince abruptly choked on his drink, and the Duke, as if unaware of the weight of his words, simply asked if everything was all right. He rubbed his neck, coming to his senses, and quietly admitted that he was curious, but not in the way the elder man suspected. The Duke decided that family must be extremely close to the young member of the royal family. The Duke leaned closer and said that he was truly interested in Alfred's readiness to challenge Prince Luri, a man the Duke himself respected. To protect Charlotte, he wanted to understand the determination that pushed him to such a bold act. Returning to the window, the prince said directly, he openly admitted that he did not feel love for the future kingdom. Unlike the young Duchess, his priorities were much more personal than the fate of the nation. He did not take his eyes off the darkness outside the window and again confirmed his indifference. All the glittering intrigues of the crown were emptiness to him. Memories of youth returned, filled with cruel whispers of nobles who were frightened by his appearance. They called him terrible, and wondered why the king allowed such a figure to remain within the palace walls. In the darkest moments, his brother became his shield, publicly shaming the gossiping courtiers and proving that Alfred was of royal blood. He ordered them to take their complaints to the king before leading the young, trembling prince away from their vie. In him, he remembered the times when Leo radiated kindness, and inspired then his brother was the only person he could truly look up to. It was a time when his brother did not care about hair and magic that repelled others. To Leo, he was simply a brother even when others saw only darkness in him. He recalls simpler times when his brother accepted him unconditionally, a memory that sharply contrasts with their current reality. Returning to the present, he clenches his fist on the window frame and confesses to the Duke. He is loyal neither to the crown nor the people, but to those he loves. His sole goal is to protect Charlotte, and it is this devotion that gives him the strength to resist his brother's cold ambition. The Duke instantly contemplates this confession. He values the prince's honesty about the lack of political ambitions, but knows such a limited viewpoint is a luxury a person in a crown cannot afford. The prince himself, having no higher goal, only laughs nervously and ironically at himself. To lighten the mood, the older man pauses the serious conversation. Steam curls above the freshly poured cup of tea as he prepares to change the subject. Suddenly, a mischievous spark lights up in his eyes, and he unexpectedly asks the guest what attracts him to Charlotte. The question makes the prince choke on his drink, and he feverishly assures that a political alliance requires no romance, while the Duke only smiles, amused by his embarrassment. The Duke's muscles bulge as he declares he is ready to challenge the crown, and he radiates a frightening power. Nearby, the young prince only looks on with distrust and begs him not to start a revolution just because of excessive paternal instinct. Suddenly, the tension disappears. The huge man bursts out laughing and admits it was only a joke, and the prince remains wary, still not believing and trying to understand the sharp leap from a possible coup to a light prank. He finally calms down and again turns his gaze to the young man, asking where his interest in Charlotte comes from, and notices that the prince is much more transparent than he thinks. His sincere care for the girl is visible to all. He is silent, lowers his eyes, and contemplates the Duke's words. The weight of his own feelings presses on him, and he gets lost in thought. Breaking the silence, the Duke recalled the daughters past her uncertain attempts to dance, and with a smile remembered how utterly hopeless she was at it. This memory emerges from the prince's youth. Then in the palace corridors, he came across Lure's brother, who was fussing over the upcoming ball and complaining that his fiancée's clumsiness forced them to rehearse dance steps separately. That same evening, after a long day of sword training, the young prince wandered the castle, his stomach growling with hunger, and his thoughts drifting to the girl Lure had mentioned, the fiancé he had only seen from afar at formal gatherings and never truly met. A sudden piercing scream, then a heavy dull thud echoed down the corridor. He froze and cautiously peeked around the corner. The sound made him shudder, and curiosity flared from the unexpected noise. There, in the middle of the grand hall, a young girl awkwardly tried to catch the rhythm of the dance, loudly counting the steps, but her efforts were short-lived. Her foot caught and she fell to the floor. She lay, rubbing her aching limbs, while the young prince watched from the shadows, his heart pounding wildly from sudden, inexplicable tension. At that moment, he realized that this clumsy, determined girl was the very bride his brother had spoken of. He stood in the shadow of the door, his eyes fixed on the young girl in the ballroom. It was already evening, yet she had been tirelessly perfecting every step since dawn. Suddenly, a dull thud echoed through the hall. She had fallen again. Her dress was torn, her skin covered with bruises from countless falls, and seeing her so pale and exhausted squeezed his heart. How many times had she already hit the floor? Although the pain that would have made anyone cry gripped her body, she forced herself to stand. He, not believing his own eyes, watched as she spun again, movements clumsy but stubborn. He could not understand why she did not give up, especially since she clearly lacked natural talent for dancing. One question burned in his mind as he clung to the edge of the door. Why was she pushing herself to such a limit? He fell, got up, and wiped his tears, but could not look away from her. And as she stomped with her awkward steps, a strange feeling of admiration began to grow within him. He had long lost hope in many things, but her unbreakable persistence became a true revelation for him. She was a beautiful light piercing the darkest night, and that glow sparked in him a sudden, desperate desire to protect her. He swore then that he would never let that spark be overshadowed. In his eyes, she was not just dancing, she was shining like a distant star. Returning to reality, he admitted that it was that very night that pushed him to act. The Duke watched him intently and finally understood how deep the devotion was that had quietly grown since their childhood. With a respectful bow, the Duke once again entrusted the prince with the fate of his daughter and asked Alfred to continue caring for her, acknowledging the bond that had once secretly blossomed between them. Later that night, when the castle was immersed in silence, she fell into a deep sleep beside her faithful maid, and even in her dreams her thoughts returned to him, whispering a quiet question about the one who held his heart. Mackinaw twirled in her tailored uniform, her hair twisted like a drill bouncing, as she stubbornly defended her choice before Charlotte, insisting it was her most precious possession, a gift personally from the young noblewoman, and refusing to change into something more practical for their journey. Setting out on the road, the three reached the foot of Mount Mt Idol, and Alfred raised his eyes to the peaks, saying that the legendary jeweler they were seeking lived somewhere beyond this harsh terrain, although the path ahead looked formidable. He listens as the maid warns about terrible monsters that, according to rumors, lurk on these slopes. They look at the path ahead, no physical obstacles, despite the villagers being known for their hostility to strangers and not letting anyone through. The prince said anxiously that Charlotte's magic was still sealed, so moving forward without escort was too dangerous because of the local beasts. Maybe we should wait for reinforcements before setting off. She looked at him with quiet but unwavering determination in her eyes, and firmly said that she was going with the group despite the risks. Because she sees herself as a future queen, she says she has never skipped training. Although she admits she is not a warrior, she is convinced that her status as a member of the Mercenary family is vital for future negotiations, especially after the public breaking of the engagement with Prince Lure. In the end, he yields to her logic, and already sensing a change, Machina intervenes with characteristic boldness, boasting that he can easily deal with any monster and that Alfred is much better off with them than with some hired guard. The lively maid grabbed the mistress by the hand and pulled her toward the mountain path, while the prince just stood and marveled at their sudden enthusiasm. As he walks, he thinks about the dark past of this land, recalling the ramen to hideous remnants from a witch or a knight's curse that are immune to ordinary magic. Only the royal family's ether or the elusive sixth element can defeat such invincible creatures, and he prays they do not encounter any. To protect them, he extends his hand, casting a search spell, and a wave of magical energy bursts from his palm, running through the forest in search of hidden threats. He says that if any monsters approach, they will have time to decide whether to flee or stand their ground, because he is confident he will notice danger in advance. Continuing to explain, he demonstrates the search ability that scans the surroundings and mentions his other specialized rings, the exchange ring and the mind ring. Charlotte, who considers this a support tool, listens with interest but is surprised by his strangely low level of doubt. He is focused on the task, and behind his back the women whisper, arguing whether his obsession with unusual rings makes him a nerd or just an eccentric, and when he overhears, it annoys him. A barely noticeable glow burst from the ring on his finger as the magic came to life. It pulsed with a steady rhythm, probing the surrounding space. Suddenly, his expression sharpens, he senses a presence, and orders the others to hide just at the moment when a gigantic pale golem emerges from the thicket. Charlotte realizes that this is not an ordinary monster, but a type of golem she has never seen before, and they quickly agree that retreat is the wisest course. The creature let out a deafening roar, its central eye glowed with malice, and it lunged at the stunned Duchess with terrifying speed. Instantly grabbing her in his arms, he jumped aside and barely avoided the devastating blow that shattered the ground where she had stood moments before. He explained that he had been channeling power into his legs and amplifying magic to catch up and save her with a sudden, furious burst. Although they were far away, the golem found them instantly, and he suspected it was some special hunter created to track targets. She lifted her eyes to him, large and shining, and quietly whispered thanks for the protection. Her heart was still pounding from the close danger. The moment of intimacy is broken. They find themselves in an awkward, tight embrace, and their companion panics, shouting that now is definitely not the time for a romantic comedy while the monster still looms over them. She hears the command as the golem's maw blazes with destructive fire, and Alfred shouts for her to protect the Duchess. She reacts instantly, slapping her palms, and a huge stone barrier rises from the ground between the monster and the one she protects. The prince sees this and prepares to rush straight into battle. Exactly so, he is the center of her anxious gaze. She watches from behind the protective wall, her heart tightening with helplessness due to the sealed magic. Makino smiles, reassures her, saying that although the prince is awkward in communication, his protective instincts are beyond doubt. She sees him surge forward. The maid asks her to believe in his strength. Though the girl's anxiety has not yet subsided, the prince's determination is unwavering as he approaches. He studies the creature's movements. His sharp eyes catch the unmistakable gleam of magical rings deeply embedded in its artificial flesh, and the realization that this is not an ordinary construct sharpens his focus. He analyzes the enemy's mechanics in detail, isolating specific spells, search, force, and shoot, which give him such deadly efficiency, and the existence of the golem, powered by such exquisite embellishments, is a mystery that demands an answer, because in all his research he has never encountered such a creature. He tensed as the Titan's fist descended like a falling mountain and created another earthen barrier to absorb the blow. The ground trembled under the colossal weight of the attack. Salt, he notices a perfect gap among the dust and debris and directs his energy, concentrating enormous physical strength in his fist while also charging the strike with explosive fire magic energy. He delivers the final formidable blow, and the golem shatters into 1,000 fragments. The threat is gone. The servant joyfully exclaims in delight at his swift and decisive victory. Despite the victory, he is still troubled by the consequences of that encounter. Even as he activates the preset teleportation ring to return to his companions, the ease of his appearance surprises others, but his thoughts are already elsewhere. They are met with sharper reproach when the newcomer inspects the aftermath and holds a small damaged ring between her fingers. Elf-like, small and stunned, she complains with despair and distrust that they completely destroyed the item, her face a continuous irritation at such thorough destruction. Standing before the mysterious woman, Alfred formally introduced himself as the third Prince of Livell and politely apologized for their intrusion. And her face, which initially showed irritation, suddenly softened with recognition. She turned out to be Eileen, the former chief court jeweler of the royal workshop. She sighs heavily, lamenting the loss of well-deserved, hard-earned peace and quiet, and especially notes that the destruction of her golem is a great misfortune. To her reproach, the prince responded with an awkward, nervous laugh. He was clearly embarrassed by the chaotic intrusion into her secluded life that they had caused. He listens as the jeweler finally softens her tone, saying it would be rude to keep a member of the royal family outside, although she herself remains wary because of the sudden visit. She leads the group to a simple two-story wooden house, built right into the mountainside, a modest refuge that is both her home and workshop. Entering the cramped room, she gestures with her hand, as if to say, sit wherever is comfortable, though inside it is already bursting with various tools and materials. She watches as the prince, not believing his eyes, scans the room. His gaze darts between piles of junk and half-finished projects, and he wonders if there is even 1 square inch of floor left. He is interrupted by her. Without ceremony or pleasantries, she immediately asks what business could have brought them so far into the mountains, while he examines a pile of things, thinking of using it as an improvised stool. The elf assumes the worst. She thinks the crown sent them to forcibly take her back into service in the royal workshop. She listens as Mackinac steps forward, extends an official paper, and explains that they are actually here to deliver a private commission from the House of Mercenary. She carefully reviews the parchment, her sharp eyes scanning the details of the Mercenary commission, while the prince watches her intently, hoping that the destruction of her guardian did not ruin the negotiations. He notices the young duchess releasing a long, relieved sigh. The tension has finally lifted from her shoulders, and he seizes the opportunity to gently ask the jeweler to hear their full story. He sees a sly smile playing on her lips. She looks back and silently signals that the man who so easily dismantled her golem is clearly not an ordinary member of the royal family. They begin to tell the whole nightmare from the moment the first prince indifferently broke off the engagement with Charlotte to when she married Alfred. They openly reveal their plan, the need for a powerful magical ring to guarantee victory in a future duel against his own brother. Explaining what is at stake, the prince formally asks for her help, his gaze firm and pleading. She listens silently, her face expressionless as she realizes the full complexity of their plight. He tried to sweeten the deal, offering access to the best conditions and unlimited royal funding, but she coldly and briefly refused, making it clear that material benefits do not interest her. Instead of further negotiations, she decisively orders them to follow her, grabs a sturdy shovel and leaves her dwelling. She leads the group into a vast, harsh expanse of mountain ridges, where the peaks loom over the landscape in silent grandeur. They make their way through dense thickets and rocky paths. The elf walks ahead with a confident, purposeful step, and the others closely follow him. Reaching the place, she loudly announced their arrival, while the prince just stood in the middle of the wild wasteland, having no idea what she was going to do with that tool in her hands. He and the others approached the maw of the dark cave, which yawned wide among the roots of the mountain. The boots rhythmically clattered under her steps. The elf woman walked forward confidently. The group marched closely behind her, but he shouted for her to wait. Wait, Charlotte held her breath excitedly and nudged him to look, and he grumbled that they had brought him here without saying a single word of explanation. When they step inside, the cave walls are covered with huge transparent crystals that shimmer and flood the space with gentle, ethereal light. The prince leans closer, examines one of the jagged protrusions, and instantly recognizes it. It is a scorched stone of the highest grade, usually used for the most powerful magical artifacts. Tools. Further inside, the elf woman stops by a simple stone cross. She admits that she often comes here to drink, and this makes him realize that they are standing in front of him. She bends down, her face unreadable, and begins to gather a handful of glowing stones from the ground. The extraordinary purity of the mana stone leaves Charlotte breathless, and even he is forced to admit that he has never seen anything like it. Like many, he is tormented by an obsessive question. Why did she leave such valuable resources in the tomb instead of processing them into powerful magical rings? He can hardly believe that so many stones of such quality, suitable even for the legendary crossring, are stored in it. The tomb senses his confusion and curiosity why she does not process them. She smiles as if she knows a secret and prepares to tell a story that will explain her unusual choice. She throws out shocking news. In a calm but heavy voice, she explains that the very stones they are looking at were once living people. This discovery stuns Charlotte and Ulfredthi are in pure shock, their thoughts racing to comprehend the terrible truth that these crystals are actually human remains. Chains, she freezes, her gaze drops. The cave is enveloped in gloomy silence, and the air hangs heavy with centuries-old secrets. Looking back 200 years, she tells how her exceptional jewelry skills once caught the king's attention and led to her appointment at the prestigious court. Jeweler, her memory darkens as she again sees that devastating battle with the demon boar, where the fall from the cliff left her broken and paralyzed on the spot. Floor of War. When the monster loomed over her, cold horror-pierced Hirsch realized she was completely powerless to move or gather even a drop of strength to defend herself from the inevitable. Strike, when hope seemed to have already faded, a mysterious surge of power rushed through her, concentrated in the ring that began to glow with an unearthly light. Suddenly the young woman rushed into battle, her voice rang out, and she boldly stepped forward to face the huge demonic boar to divert its attention from the fall. Fallen Elf. As soon as the immediate threat was eliminated, the girl crouched down with a mischievous, cunning smile. She teasingly asked if Island had just decided to tan a little in the middle of Forest. This encounter changed everything. Jeweler Netos took her in, used her unique restoration magic to heal wounds and strengthen her power, and ultimately this allowed them to defeat the demonic boar before Netos invited back her craftsman colleague to her home. She lived alone on empty idols since her parents' death, but their shared passion for making jewelry immediately created a bond between them. However, as soon as the young craftswoman was asked to show her work, the atmosphere shifted. Seeing the rings, the elf was overwhelmed by a deep wave of defeat for the first time she felt truly surpassed in the craft. Although the jewelry seemed simple at first glance, the obsession and skill woven into each piece were stunning, far beyond what she could have hoped to achieve. Then, driven by the desire to uncover these secrets and the refusal to accept defeat by her rival, she decided to start a new life right there next to the human girl. But under the competitive fervor, a simpler truth emerged for the first time. She truly enjoyed it. Years, they shared countless moments of laughter and warm company, a bond that seemed it could withstand even eternity. When the elf recounts these memories to the gathered, a heavy silence falls over Charlotte and the others. They feel an unspoken sorrow for this tale. And she admits that even then one shadow already loomed, which she desperately tried to. Could not be ignored. Looking back on those days when they studied together among piles of books and tools, the harsh truth about their different lifespans became inevitable. And she painfully realized that, being just a human, her friend's life was a trembling candle that would go out long before her elven path reached twilight.